The Cathedral of Ironreach had never tasted such silence. Maven knelt at the foot of the marble stair, her forehead pressed to the cold stone, and counted the heartbeats between breaths. 200 wolves stood ranked along the nave behind her. 200 more lined the upper galleries. Beyond the great rose window, an entire city waited in the snow to hear the bell that would announce a new Luna. She had been chosen for this, not as the bride, as the witness. The lowest-born servant in the royal household, the girl who scrubbed ash from the hearths and carried linens up the servants' stair, would kneel at the feet of the new queen and offer her the ceremonial cup of submission. It was tradition. The old ways insisted that a Luna's reign begin with the lowest wolf in the realm bowing before her, so that none could claim the new mistress had not been blessed by every rung of the ladder she now stood atop. Maven had been chosen because she was nothing. She had not been chosen because she was carrying the king's child. Her hand drifted to her stomach beneath the rough gray gown. 3 months along, by her own counting. Still flat enough to hide. Still hers to keep secret a little longer. The high cantor's voice rolled through the nave like a slow tide. Let the unworthy come forward. That was her cue. Maven rose. Her knees ached. The hem of her gown was already gray with cathedral dust. She lifted the silver cup from the cushion 2 acolytes held out to her, and she walked the long aisle toward the dais where the Alpha King of Ironreach stood beside the woman the council had chosen to rule beside him. Severin. She did not look at him. She had promised herself she would not look at him. To look at him in this place, in front of these people, would shatter her like glass dropped from a tower. For 9 months she had known him in ways the cathedral would never permit her to admit. She had known the rough warmth of his palm against her jaw in the dark of the eastern garden. She had known the tremor in his voice when he whispered her name into her hair. She had known the careful, reverent press of his mouth against the inside of her wrist, where her pulse ran fast as a hunted thing, and she had known the words he had spoken there. You are mine, Maven. Whatever they make me say in the daylight, you are mine when the stars come out. She had believed him. She had believed him even when he told her the council was forcing him to take a Luna of noble blood. She had believed him when he swore the binding would be a public ceremony only, an alliance of names and not of souls. She had believed him 3 nights ago when he gripped her hands in the dark and promised that nothing would change between them after the bell rang. And now, the bell was waiting. And she was walking toward it with his unborn child inside her and a cup of submission in her hands. The new Luna stood very still on the dais. Lysith, of House Drenner. Tall, pale, beautiful in the cold and arranged way of women who had been trained from girlhood to be looked at. Her gown was woven of midnight silk and frost thread. Her hair fell down her back in a single dark river. Her eyes did not move when Maven approached, because her eyes had long ago learned that servants were not to be seen. Severin stood 1 pace behind her. Maven felt him there the way a deer feels the weight of the wolf in the underbrush. She did not need to look. Her body knew. The mark he had left on the curve of her shoulder, the one no one had ever seen, the one she had hidden under high collars for 3 full seasons, began to burn. A slow, deep heat, like a coal pressed flat against bone. She climbed the 3 steps of the dais. She knelt. Mistress of the Moon, Maven said, in the small, clear voice she had practiced for a week. I am the lowest of your house. I bring you the cup of unworthiness that your reign may rise from the ground I kneel upon. Lysith did not speak. Lysith was not required to speak. Lysith was required only to drink. Her pale hand reached for the cup. And in the half-breath before the cup changed hands, Maven made the mistake she had spent the entire night begging herself not to make. She looked up. Not at Lysith. At him. Severin's eyes were already on her, and the mark on her shoulder did not burn then. It tore. A sound left her throat that was almost a gasp and almost a small soft no, and she felt the silver cup begin to slip from her fingers, and she felt the world tilt sideways, And somewhere far away the High Cantor was lifting his hand to give Lysith permission to drink, and the bell ringer in the tower was lifting the great bronze rope, and 200 wolves in the nave were drawing in the breath that would become the howl of welcome for their new Luna. And Severin moved. He moved before the cup could fall. The Alpha King of Ironreach, in full ceremonial black, stepped past Lysith of House Drenner as if she were a candle stand he had not noticed, and he reached down, and he caught Maven under both arms, and he lifted her to her feet, in front of 200 wolves, in front of the High Cantor, in front of the woman whose hand was still extended toward a cup that would never arrive. Maven could not breathe. She could not understand what was happening to her body. His hands were on her. His hands were holding her up. His hands were not letting her sink back to her knees, no matter how much instinct screamed at her bones to go down where bones belonged. "Stand," he said, very low, and only she could hear it. "Stand, Maven. Do not kneel to her. Do not ever kneel to her." The cathedral made a sound that was not a sound. It was the absence of sound. It was the suction left behind when 200 breaths stopped at once. The High Cantor's mouth opened and closed. The bell in the tower did not ring. Lysith of House Drenner stood with her hand still outstretched, palm upward, fingers slightly curled, waiting for a cup that no longer existed in the universe she had been promised. Severin did not let go of Maven. "My king," the High Cantor said, in the cracked voice of a man whose script had just burned in his hands. "The rite of lowering. The new Luna must receive." "There is no new Luna." He said it the way a man says a thing that has been waiting in his mouth for a very long time. A ripple ran through the wolves in the nave. Not a roar. Not yet. The sort of low, instinctive sound a pack makes when the alpha has done something the pack does not yet understand, but has already decided to follow. Lysith's hand was still outstretched. She lowered it slowly. Her face did not change. Her face had been trained too well for that. But her eyes, the small living animal part of her that no etiquette tutor could reach, the eyes flicked once to her father in the front row of the noble gallery, and Maven, who had spent 3 years learning to read the eyes of people who were not supposed to be looking at her, saw the question there. "Father, what do I do?" And in the front row, Lord Kelrick of House Drenor did not answer. His face had gone the color of old bone. "Severin." Lysith found her voice. It was a remarkable voice, even now. Cool, measured, the voice of a woman who had been told her entire life that she would one day speak from this dais. "My lord, there has been a confusion. The girl is—" "The girl," Severin said, "is carrying my heir." Maven's knees nearly went again. He felt them go. His arm tightened around her waist and held her up, and she understood with a dull, astonished clarity that he had known. He had known about the child. He had known, somehow, before she had told him, before she had told anyone, before the herbwife in the lower town had pressed 2 fingers to her wrist and given her the news she had carried in her chest like a struck match for 11 days. He had known, and he had walked into this cathedral knowing, and he had let her put on the gray gown and walk the long aisle and kneel at the foot of the stair, because he had needed every wolf in Ironreach to see what was about to happen. He had needed witnesses. Slowly, deliberately, in front of the High Cantor and the noble galleries and the 200 ranked wolves, the Alpha King turned Maven so that the entire cathedral could see her face. Then he reached up, with the same hand that had hours earlier signed the binding contracts of House Drenner, and he pulled aside the high gray collar of her servant's gown. The mark on her shoulder lay bare, a claiming bite, old, healed, unmistakable. The kind of mark that an alpha gave only once in a lifetime, and only to one wolf. The cathedral made the sound again, the not sound, the held breath. And then someone in the 3rd rank of the nave, an old gray-muzzled warrior with a torn ear, dropped to one knee. Then the wolf beside him. Then the entire 3rd rank. Then the 2nd. Then the 1st. 200 wolves in the Cathedral of Ironreach knelt to the servant girl in the grey gown, and the woman in the midnight silk on the dais was the only person left standing, and her hand had begun, very faintly, to tremble. "This is a trick." Lord Caelric of House Drenner had risen from his seat in the gallery. His voice carried the full weight of a man who had spent a great deal of money to sit in that seat. "This is sorcery. The girl has bewitched him. The mark is forged. The pregnancy is a lie. My king, you have been... Caelric." Severin did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "If you say one more word in this cathedral, I will have you silenced on the altar before the candles burn down. Sit down." Lord Caelric sat down. He sat down very fast. Severin turned back to Maven. The cathedral, the kneeling wolves, the trembling Luna that was not, the high cantor frozen mid-right, all of it fell away from his face. There was only her. There was only the small servant girl in the grey gown with a king's mark on her shoulder, and a king's child beneath her hands. He bent his head. "Forgive me," he said, against her hair, so quietly that even she almost did not hear it. "Forgive me for letting you walk this far. I had to be sure they all saw." And then, while she was still trying to understand what he meant by "sure they all saw," his eyes moved past her, across the dais, to the place where Lyseath of House Drenner was standing with her empty hand at her side. And his eyes changed. Maven had known him for 9 months. She had seen him laugh and grieve and want and rage. She had never seen the look that came into his eyes, never seen the look that came into his eyes now. It was the look of a man who had walked into the cathedral already knowing who was going to bleed for what had been done to her. "Take the Lady Drenner into custody," he said. The cathedral exploded. She did not see the rest of what happened in the cathedral. She did not see Lord Caelric of House Drenner try to rise a second time and find 4 wolves on him before his boots cleared the bench. She did not see Lyseath refuse to be touched and walk down the dais of her own accord with her chin raised so high it looked like a dare, and she did not see the high cantor sink into his ceremonial chair and put his face in both hands. She did not see, because Severin had already lifted her off the dais and was carrying her through the curtained door behind the altar that no servant of Ironreach had ever been permitted to walk through. She did not see the snow beginning to fall outside the great rose window. She did not hear the bell in the tower, which the bell ringer had finally, in the absence of any other instruction, begun to ring. Not the single clean note for a new Luna, something older, something the bell ringer had read about once and had never, in his 40 years in the tower, expected to ring. The bell of recognition. Across the city of Ironreach, wolves lifted their heads. Across the snowfields beyond the walls, wolves lifted their heads. In a tower room 3 streets from the cathedral, a woman in mourning grey closed a small leather book very slowly and said, "To no one. So it has begun." And in the curtained corridor behind the altar, Maven pressed her forehead to the hollow of the Alpha King's throat and felt, for the first time in her life, what it was to be lifted instead of to bow. She did not yet know what it would cost. 9 months later, in a fishing town called Hollowmere, a woman named Rin was teaching a child how to set a broken finger. "Pull straight," Rin said. "Not toward you, straight." The child, a boy of 9 with hair the color of wet sand, gripped his sister's small crooked finger and pulled it the way Rin had shown him. The little girl made a noise like a kettle, and then the finger was in its socket again, and Rin was already wrapping the splint with a strip of boiled linen. "There," Rin said. "Tomorrow it will hurt worse than today. The day after that, less. By the next moon, you will not remember which hand it was." The boy looked up at her with the silent, watchful gravity of a child who had been told all his life that his family had nothing, and who had just learned that his family had a sister with 2 hands again. "Thank you, Mistress Rin. Tell your mother to send the flower she promised. I do not need it. But tell her to send it anyway, so she does not feel ashamed when next she walks past my door." The boy nodded with the seriousness of a small diplomat, and he led his sister out into the salt wind. Rin closed the door behind them and stood with her back against it. The cottage smelled of dried sage and tallow and the faint sweetness of the cedar shavings she scattered on the floor each morning. A cradle stood by the hearth. Inside the cradle, swaddled in 3 layers of wool against the sea cold that crept in even on summer evenings, a baby slept with one tiny fist pressed against his cheek. Her son. She had named him Kaldin because it had been her grandfather's name, and because it was a name no one in Ironreach would ever expect a runaway servant to have given a child. She had not named him Severin's son. She had not named him after anyone whose name she had once whispered into the dark of an eastern garden. She had not put a ribbon around his small wrist with a king's sigil tucked inside it. She had not done 100 small, foolish things she had thought of doing in the first weeks, when grief had still been a creature with teeth, when she had still believed in some quiet, useless corner of herself that a king might find a fishing town if he looked hard enough. She had stopped believing that. She had stopped believing it 3 days after she had run. Rin crossed the cottage and stood over the cradle and watched her son breathe, and she let herself, for the count of 10, remember the curtained corridor behind the altar. She remembered the warmth of a king's throat against her forehead. She remembered the words he had said, low into her hair. "Forgive me for letting you walk this far. I had to be sure they all saw." She remembered understanding, a few minutes later, what those words had meant. He had used her, not cruelly. She had spent 9 months working that part out. He had not been cruel. He had been strategic, which was perhaps the worst thing a man could be to a woman who had thought herself loved. He had let her put on the gray gown. He had let her kneel at the foot of the stair, with the silver cup in her trembling hands. He had let her walk past 200 wolves believing that her life was about to end in front of the only people who would ever know her name, because he had needed those 200 wolves to see the moment of his refusal. He had needed witnesses to the precise instant a king chose a servant over a lady. He had needed political weight. He had needed an unforgettable image. She had been the image. And in the curtained corridor, with her forehead against his throat and the cathedral exploding behind them, she had asked him a single question. "Did you know I was carrying when you let me walk that aisle?" And the small pause before he answered had been the answer. She had run that night. She had taken nothing from the palace except the gray gown on her body and a single coin she had hidden in a crack in the hearthstones of the servants' quarters 2 years before, against a future she had not been able to imagine. She had walked out through the kitchen yard gate while the palace was still in chaos. She had walked 17 days. She had reached Hollowmere in the 2nd week of spring. She had given the coin to the woman who let her the cottage. She had given the cottage a new name on her own tongue, and she had given herself a new name to go with it. Rin, the herb wife. Widow of a sailor lost at sea. No people, no past, no questions, please. The town had not asked questions. Hollowmere did not, in general, ask questions of women who arrived in spring with pregnant bellies and haunted eyes. Hollowmere had a long memory for kindness and a short one for everything else. And the mark on her shoulder, which had burned and burned in the cathedral, had not stopped burning. She had thought it would. She had read, in a book she had stolen from the palace library at 15, that an unfinished bond unraveled like a rope when the 2 wolves were parted by more than 100 leagues. She had walked far more than 100 leagues. She had walked nearly 300. The mark still burned. Sometimes at night she felt it pulse in time with another heart, far away and frantic, and she pressed her palm flat against the place above her shoulder blade, and she said, into the dark, "No." Just that. No. And after a while the pulse would grow fainter, as if she had pushed it back down a long corridor and she could sleep. She had become very good at saying no to her own body. The child in the cradle stirred, and she bent and lifted him without waking him, and she carried him to the small window that looked out over the harbor, and she stood there in the last gold of the evening and watched the gulls come in across the breakwater. "We do not need him," she said softly against her son's downy head. "We never needed him." The mark on her shoulder pulsed once, hard as if to argue. She closed her eyes and ignored it. Outside, on the wet stones of the harbor road, a horse came around the bend at a tired walk, ridden by a rider in a cloak the color of old blood. The rider did not know yet that he had found her, but he had. His name was Othin, and he had been riding for 9 days. He was a salt trader's son, ordinary in every visible way, and he had stopped in Hollowmere because his horse had thrown a shoe, and the only farrier within a day's ride lived above the tavern at the foot of the harbor road. He took a room. He ate a bowl of fish stew. He sat by the fire and listened to the old men of Hollowmere argue about a storm 2 winters ago, and he said nothing, because Othin had learned in childhood that the fastest way to find out a thing was to be the quietest person in the room. He was looking for a woman. He was not looking for her on his own behalf. In the 4th hour of the evening, the tavern door opened, and a girl of about 19 came in to fetch a jug of milk for her mother, and she stopped at the bar, and she said to the tavern keeper, in the careless half-voice of a girl who had been allowed to stay up too late, "Mistress Rin says the baby is teething again. She wants the goat's milk if there's any left." Othin, by the fire, did not move. He waited until the girl had paid for the milk and gone. He waited until the tavern keeper had moved off to the back room. He waited until the old men had returned to arguing about the storm. Then he stood up, set 2 coppers on the table for his stew, and walked out into the salt wind. He did not go to the cottage. He went instead to the small chapel at the top of the harbor road, and he knelt at the back of it where no candles were burning, and he took from inside his coat a folded square of parchment that had been creased and recreased so many times the folds were beginning to soften through. He did not unfold it. He had read it enough times. The parchment said, in a handwriting Othin had been told to recognize the way other men were taught to recognize their own mothers. "If you find her, do not approach her. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you. Send word and only word by the fastest road to the man whose ring this letter was sealed with. He will come. He must come himself. She will run from anyone else. Do not, under any imaginable circumstance, let her know she has been found." Othin folded the parchment again. He put it back inside his coat. He knelt for a moment longer with his head bowed. Not in prayer, because Othin had never been the praying sort, but in the brief private acknowledgement a man pays to the size of a thing he has just done. Then he stood up, and he walked back down the harbor road in the dark, and he saddled his horse 2 hours before the farrier had finished the new shoe, and he rode out of Hollowmere on 3 good horseshoes and 1 bad, because he had 9 days to ride, and the message in his coat could not wait for the 4th. He passed Rin's cottage on the way out of town. A single candle was burning in the window. He did not turn his head. In the cottage, Rin felt her shoulder burn. It was a different burn this time. Not the slow, constant ache she had learned to live with. Not the frantic pulse she had taught herself to push down a corridor and ignore. It was sharper, closer. The burn of a coal that had been somewhere across the country an hour ago and was now in the next room. She set her son in the cradle. She walked to the door. She opened it a crack. The harbor road was empty. The salt wind blew. A single set of fresh hoof prints stood in the wet sand of the road, leading north, away from town. She stared at the hoof prints for a long time. Then she closed the door. Then she locked it. Then she walked to the chest under her bed, and she lifted out, from beneath 3 folded blankets and a small wooden horse she had carved for Calden in the 4th month, the only thing she had not been able to make herself burn. A scrap of black cloth. The corner of a king's ceremonial cloak, torn off in the curtained corridor, in the moment she had pulled away from him and understood what he had done. She had not meant to take it. It had come away in her hand. She had carried it 17 days in her sleeve and had never been able afterward to put it in a fire. She held the scrap of cloth. The mark on her shoulder went very still. "He knows," she said aloud, to the empty cottage, to the sleeping child, to the salt wind, to herself. He knows where I am. Her son made a small sound in the cradle, and she went to him, and she lifted him, and she stood in the middle of the cottage holding him, and for the first time in 9 months, she did not know what to do. She did 3 things before dawn. She wrapped Calden in his thickest swaddle and laid him in the basket she used for market days. She filled a leather satchel with the things she had promised herself in the 2nd week of spring that she would always keep ready by the door: dried meat, a flint, a needle, 3 coins, a small knife, a clean shift, a single dose of the sleeping tincture she had made herself in case the child grew ill on the road. She put on her boots and her cloak, and she stood for a long moment in the middle of the cottage with the basket in one arm and the satchel over the other shoulder, and she looked at the cradle and the hearth, and the table where she had set a child's broken finger that very afternoon. She had been happy here. She had not let herself say it, because saying it would have been the kind of luck a god could overhear, but she had been. Hollowmere had not asked her name. Hollowmere had not asked her to kneel. She was not going to be allowed to keep it. She had reached for the door when the knock came. 3 knocks. Soft. The kind of knock a person used when they did not wish to wake a child. Rin did not breathe. Mistress Rin. A woman's voice, low and steady. I am alone. I have not come to take you anywhere. I have come to tell you a thing you do not know. May I come in? Rin looked at the basket on her arm. She looked at the door. She looked at the small knife in her satchel and she calculated, very fast, the things a small knife could and could not do against whatever was standing on the other side of the door. Who are you? My name is Sister Helvena. I am a moon priestess of the Greycliff Order. I have been looking for you for 4 months. I am the only person on this road who is on your side. May I come in? Rin opened the door 6 inches, no more. The woman on her step was small and old, and wrapped in the gray of the moon priestess orders, and she was carrying nothing. Her hands were empty and held, palm up, at her sides, in the old gesture that meant, I am unarmed, and I will let you see I am unarmed. Rin opened the door the rest of the way. Sister Helvena stepped inside. She did not take off her cloak. She did not sit. She looked at the cradle and at the basket on Rin's arm, and her old face did something complicated that was not quite a smile. Good, she said. You are leaving. That means you still listen to your shoulder. We have less to undo than I feared. Speak fast. Your child is the heir of Ironreach. You know this. You have known it since the cathedral. What you do not know is that the king did not let you walk that aisle to use you. Do not. Hear me. Helvena's voice did not rise, but something underneath it sharpened, and Rin felt in the underside of her teeth the faint singing pressure of a wolf older than she had taken this small woman to be. He did not let you walk that aisle for an image. He let you walk it because if he had refused House Drenner in private, in his own council chamber with no witnesses, he would have been dead by the next moonrise. House Drenner had 3 of his betas in their pocket. House Drenner had a vial of Moonsbane oil already in the kitchen wine. House Drenner had spent 4 years preparing to put their daughter on that dais, and the moment they understood he meant to refuse her, they meant to put a knife in his back, and a regent on his throne, and a ward's collar on you. He let you walk the aisle because the cathedral was the only place in the kingdom where he could refuse them in front of so many witnesses that they could not afford to kill him for it. He let you walk it because 200 wolves kneeling to you was the only shield strong enough to keep you alive when the sun came up. Rin had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of it. He told you this. He told me nothing. He has told no one. I am telling you what I have spent 4 months learning by walking back through every door in Ironreach that opens to a moon priestess. I am telling you what House Drenner confessed under oath at their trial, before the king had Lord Kaelric silenced for what he had said to you on the dais. Helvena paused. The king has not slept in 9 months. He believes you ran because you understood that he had used you. He believes he deserves it. He is letting himself be eaten alive by the believing. Why have you come? Because the believing is killing him. Because a king who is being eaten alive cannot rule. Because the rest of House Drenner, the cousins and the cadet branches the king did not have the evidence to execute, have spent 9 months preparing a second move, and the second move is not against the king. Helvenna looked at the cradle. It is against the child. Rin set the basket down very slowly on the table. How close? Close enough that I have ridden 3 days without sleep to reach you ahead of them. Close enough that the man who passed your cottage tonight on the harbor road was not the man you should be afraid of. He was the king's tracker, sent to find you and report back to the king alone. The men you should be afraid of have been in this town for 2 days. They are waiting for the tracker to leave, because the tracker would have killed them if he had seen them, and they did not wish to be seen. Outside the cottage, somewhere 2 streets away, a dog began to bark. A second dog joined it. A third. Helvenna's old eyes went toward the sound without moving her head. They are coming up the harbor road now, she said, in the calm voice of a woman who had counted on exactly this. They will be here in 7 minutes. There is a root cellar under your hearthstone. I marked it from the road 4 months ago. Take the child into it. Do not come out. Whatever you hear above you, do not come out. I am not hiding under my own floor while you are hiding under your own floor, because if they find the child, the kingdom ends, not falls. Ends. The bond between your child and the king is the only thing keeping the realm from breaking into 7 wars at once, and House Drenner knows it. And I have not ridden 3 days to lose this in an argument with the mother. Get in the cellar. The dogs in the next street had gone quiet. That was worse than the barking. Rin lifted the cradle. She lifted Calden out of it. She lifted the iron ring set in the hearthstone and pulled, and the stone came up on its old hinges, and she went down the 4 wooden steps into the dark with the child against her chest, and Helvenna closed the stone over her head, and the cottage above her went silent. In the dark of the cellar, with her son's small breath against her collarbone, Rin pressed her free hand flat against the place on her shoulder where the mark lived. The mark was not burning anymore. It was answering. A long way off, across the country, across the snowfields and the cathedral towers and the 9 months of running. A heart that had not been allowed to pulse in time with hers for half a year was pulsing in time with hers again. He was riding. He was riding very fast. She did not know yet whether he would arrive before House Drenner came through her front door. Above her, in the cottage, she heard the faint creak of the door opening, and Sister Helvenna's old voice saying, very pleasantly, in the tone of a woman who had been a moon priestess for 60 years and had not always been a peaceful one. Gentlemen, you have come to the wrong house. The first man through the door died before he understood that he had stepped inside. Rin, in the dark of the cellar with her son against her chest, heard it the way you hear a heavy book dropped on a wooden floor in another room. A short, wet thump. A choked-off sound that was almost a word and was not quite a word. The soft clatter of a blade falling onto floorboards. Then Sister Helvenna's voice again, still pleasant, still as steady as if she were ordering bread. The next gentleman, please. Do come in. There is room. The second man came in faster, because he had heard the first man fall, and faster was the wrong choice. There was another thump, a grunt, the brief, almost surprised sound a wolf makes when something unexpected has gone through its ribs. A third set of boots on the threshold. This one stopped. Old woman, a low voice said, step aside. I am not old, Sister Helvenna said. I am ancient. There is a difference. Your grandfather would have known it. Walk back into the road. There are 6 of us. There were 8 a moment ago. Walk back into the road. A long silence above the cellar stones, the kind of silence in which men were doing arithmetic. Then a different voice, younger, sharper. The voice of a man who had not been the one in charge a minute ago and who had decided, in the space of 2 heartbeats, that he was in charge now. Burn the cottage. Rin's blood stopped in her body. Try, Sister Helvena said. The cottage above her erupted. Rin could not see it. She could only listen. She heard the snarl of a wolf shifting mid-room. Not a small wolf. Not a young one. An old battle-shaped thing whose growl had the shape of decades in it. She heard a man scream the short scream of a man who had not expected the small old woman in the gray cloak to be carrying that particular wolf inside her skin. She heard a window break. She heard a second snarl, lower and farther away, from the road outside, which meant Helvena had not come alone. She heard a horse rear. She heard a man shouting orders that were already too late to give. She heard her hearthstone shake. Calden, in her arms, did not wake. He did not cry. He had been a quiet baby from the first hour of his life, and Rin had thought, sometimes, that he had inherited his quietness from a father who had spent half his childhood learning not to be heard in the wrong rooms of a palace. She pressed her mouth to the top of his head, and she breathed against his hair, and she counted. Because counting was the only thing she could do that was not screaming. She got to 47 before the cottage above her went still. The stillness was worse than the noise had been. Then the stone over her head moved. Rin raised the small knife from the satchel without thinking about it, because thinking would have been slower than her hand was, and she pointed the blade up at the widening crack of light, and her arm shook so hard the blade made a small bright sound against itself in the dark. A face appeared in the crack. Not Helvena's, a man's face. Young, mid-20s, pale hair cropped short, a long thin scar running from his hairline to his jaw on the left side. Eyes the color of weak tea. "My lady," he said very quietly in the voice of a man who had been told, very firmly a long time ago, that he was not to frighten her under any circumstance. "My name is Joran. I serve the king. There are 5 dead men in your kitchen and 1 in your dooryard. There is also a Greycliff sister in your front room who has asked me to inform you that she is not as young as she used to be, and has put her hip out for you, and would like very much to be helped up off your floor before her dignity is completed entirely." Rin, in the dark with her son and her shaking knife, made a small sound that was not a laugh, and was not a sob, and was somewhere in the broken middle place between the two. "Where is he?" Joran did not need to ask who. 2 hours' ride. The tracker did not stop in the next town, my lady. He sent a hawk from the saddle. The king has been on the road since the hawk reached him. He left the column behind. He is alone, and he is riding harder than the horse can carry him, and if you wish to be gone before he arrives, I will help you go. The sister told me to offer you the choice, and not to argue with whichever choice you make. Rin climbed the 4 wooden steps out of the cellar. The cottage smelled of blood and broken pottery and, faintly, of the lavender she kept in a clay jar by the window. The jar had survived. Most things had not. There was a man face down across her table with the back of his neck open. There was another in the hearth, half-shifted, his fur still smoking from the fire he had tried to start. Sister Helvena was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, and her gray cloak pulled neatly over her legs, holding her left hip with both hands and watching Rin with a look that was almost amused. "I told you," Helvena said. "I am not the peaceful sort." Rin knelt by her. She put Calden, still asleep, into the old woman's arms without asking, because the old woman's arms were the only safe place she could see. Helvena received the child with the slow, careful movements of a person whose hip was screaming, and looked down at his small, sleeping face and said, in a voice gone unexpectedly soft, "Oh, oh, you are exactly the trouble I thought you would be." "Sister." "Yes." "Will he come into this cottage and use me again?" Helvena did not look up from the baby. She took a long breath. She let it out. "He will come into this cottage," she said. "And he will see what he did to you in that cathedral on your face and on your hands, and on the fact that you ran for 9 months, and he will not have a single defense for himself, because there is no defense, because you are right that he used you. He used the only piece of you he had, which was your trust, because it was the only weapon he had against the people who were going to kill him before sunrise. He will not ask you to forgive him. He will not have the right." What he will ask you, my lady, if I know him at all, and I have known him since he was a boy of 6, is whether you will let him stand in the same room with his son for the length of time it takes the boy to wake. Rin's hands had begun to shake again, differently this time. And if I say no, then he will go back out the door and he will ride back to Ironreach, and he will rule a kingdom for the rest of his life with a hole in his chest the exact size of you. He will not make you. He has never made you. That is the one thing in the entire bad wreck of what he did that he has not done. Outside, somewhere on the harbor road, a horse was coming. Not at a walk this time, at a flat, dead run. He did not knock. He did not knock because by the time he reached the cottage door, his hand was already on the wood, and pushing, and Rin understood that he had not paused once since he had left wherever he had been when the hawk had found him. He filled the doorway. Severin of Ironreach, Alpha King, the man for whom 200 wolves had once knelt in a cathedral, came through her crooked little fishing town door in a riding cloak that was wet to the shoulders with horse sweat and crusted at the hem with mud from 3 counties. And he looked at the bodies on her floor, and he looked at Halvena on the wall, and he looked at Joran by the cellar mouth. And his eyes passed over all of them the way a man's eyes pass over the furniture in a room he has been in 1,000 times. His eyes stopped on Rin. He did not move. She had thought, in 9 months, that she had imagined how big he was. She had told herself, in the dark of the cottage, that her memory had made him taller and broader and more frightening than he had been, because grief did that. Grief made the man who had hurt you into a giant. She had not made him a giant. He was exactly as she remembered, exactly as tall, exactly as broad, exactly as still in the doorway of a room where 6 men had just died, as if the bodies on her floor were not even a thing that required acknowledgement. The only thing about him she had not remembered correctly was the look on his face. She had remembered him as a man who could mask anything. The man in her doorway could not mask his face at all. He looked, very simply, like someone had been hitting him in the chest for 9 months without stopping. Maven, he said. She did not correct him to Rin. She did not have it in her, suddenly, to defend the false name. The false name belonged to the woman she had been an hour ago, before her hearth had filled with smoke, and before an old moon priestess had laid her sleeping son against her shoulder. The false name had been a useful door. The door was open now. There was no point pretending the door was the room. Severin. His name in her mouth made him shut his eyes. Just for a heartbeat. The way a man shuts his eyes at the first taste of water after a long thirst, because the taste itself is almost more than he can bear. He opened them again. I will not come further in, he said, until you tell me I may. I will stand in this door for as long as it takes. The horse can wait. The kingdom can wait. Tell me when I may come into your house, and not before. The word house did something to her she had not expected. She had been bracing for cottage, which would have been a way of making it small. She had been bracing for hovel even, because she had once been a servant girl, and he had once been a king. And the language of kings about the homes of servants did not, in her experience, run kind. She had not been prepared for house. House was the word a man used about a place where a person he respected lived. Come in, she said. He came in 3 steps and stopped. He did not come closer. He looked at the cradle in the corner. Empty. He looked at Halvena against the wall. He looked at the small bundle of swaddle in the old woman's arms. He did not move toward the bundle. That, Rin thought afterward, was the moment her hand started to come unfastened from the small knife. He did not move toward the child. He had ridden 2 hours from wherever the hawk had found him, and his son was 3 steps away from him in an old woman's arms, and he stood in the middle of her floor and waited for permission, like a man who had taught himself, by very hard practice, that he had no rights in this room. His name is Calden, she said. A small sound left him. She did not look at his face to see what kind of sound. She did not have it in her, yet, to look. May I? No, not yet. Sit down, Severin. You are about to fall over. He sat down. He sat down on the edge of her hearth, on the same warm stone she had cooked her supper over 4 hours earlier, and he put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. And the Alpha King of Ironreach, who had not, in any room she had ever been in, allowed himself to be seen tired, let himself be seen tired in front of her. She looked at the back of his bent head. The dark hair was longer than she remembered. There was gray in it now, at the temples, that there had not been 9 months ago. She had done that. Or House Drenner had done it. Or the road had done it. Or all of them together had done it. And she would not, she promised herself, take any single piece of it on as her own debt. I am going to say a thing, she said. And you are going to listen to me say it. And you are not going to interrupt. And you are not going to defend yourself. And when I am done, you are going to answer one question. And after that, we will see whether you stand back up off that hearthstone or whether I help you stand. He did not lift his head from his hands. Yes. You used me. Yes. You let me put on the gray gown. Yes. You let me walk that aisle. Yes. You let me kneel. Yes. You knew I was carrying. A pause. The smallest pause of his life. And then into his hands, in a voice that had nothing left in it. Yes. I waited 9 months for you to tell me what you were planning. 9 months. I would have walked the aisle anyway. I would have walked the aisle in a wedding gown if you had asked me. I would have walked it in nothing at all. I did not need to be a chess piece on the cathedral floor, Severin. I needed to be told. I know. Do you? Do you know? Because for 9 months I have been asking myself why a man who said the things you said to me in that garden could not give me the courtesy of a single sentence in the night before. They are going to try to kill me, Maven, and the only way out I can find is to use the cathedral against them, and I am going to use you in it. And I am sorry, and I love you. And please. That is the sentence. That sentence would have taken 20 seconds to say. You did not say it. You let me kneel. I was afraid you would refuse. His voice was muffled by his hands, and she still heard every word of it. Not because I doubted your courage, because I doubted my own. If you had refused, Maven, I would not have had the strength to go through with it. I would have run with you. I would have taken you out of the palace that night and ridden, and let House Drenner have the throne, and the kingdom would have burned in 3 years. And I would not have cared. I would not have had it in me to care. I knew that about myself. So I did not give you the chance to refuse. I am not telling you this to be forgiven. I am telling you because you asked, and because it is the truth, and because I will not lie to you again as long as I live. The cottage was very quiet. Halvena, in the corner, was looking at the ceiling, with the deliberate look of a person determined not to be a witness to a thing she was nonetheless fully witnessing. That is your defense, Rin said. It is not a defense. It is an answer. What is the question? He lifted his face out of his hands. The question Halvena had told her he would ask was already in his eyes. He did not have to say it, but he said it anyway, because she had told him to, and because he had said he would not lie. Will you let me stand in this room? Severin said, for the length of time it takes my son to wake? She did not answer for a long count. Halvena, in the corner, very gently, very deliberately, jostled the bundle in her arms. Calden made the small, soft surfacing noise he always made coming out of sleep. His eyes opened. They were the color of weak tea, which was not Rin's color and was not Severin's color, and Rin understood, with the small, clean shock of a thing she had been refusing to know, that they were her grandfather's color, the man whose name she had given the child. The child had decided, on his own, in the womb, to bring her grandfather back into the world. She crossed the cottage. She lifted Calden out of Halvena's arms. She walked him to the man on the hearthstone, and she stopped 1 pace short of him, and she said, in a voice that did not entirely belong to her, "Hold your son, Severin. We will talk about the rest of it after. He held out his arms. His hands were shaking. She put the baby into them. The Alpha King of Ironreach looked down at his son for the first time, and the small boy looked back up at him with a king's grandfather's eyes, and Severin made a sound Rin had not heard a grown man make before in her life. And in the corner of the cottage, Sister Helvena of the Grey Cliff Order quietly began to cry. He held the child for a long time. Rin let him. She sat on the small wooden stool by the table, and she watched the Alpha King of Ironreach learn the weight of his son, and she did not move to take the boy back. Because there was a part of her, a part she did not yet have a name for, that needed to see what his hands looked like around something fragile. His hands looked like a man's hands, not a king's, not a wolf's, not the hands of the man who had stood in the cathedral and said, "Take the Lady Drenner into custody," in a voice that had ended a noble house. A man's hands around a small sleeping child, and the man had no idea what to do with them, and was figuring it out, and was getting it right. Severin. He looked up. "How did House Drenner find me?" The look on his face changed. The softness around his eyes did not entirely leave, because the child was still in his arms. But underneath it, something old and very tired came to the surface. "They did not find you tonight," he said. "They found you 4 months ago." "Then why?" "Because they wanted you to live a little while first. They wanted you to put down enough roots in this town that when they came, they could take the town with you. Burn it. Take 3 streets. Make it look like a fire that began by accident in a fishing village in spring. They were not coming for you, Maven. They were coming for an inferno, and you and the boy were going to be in the middle of it, and the whole country was going to read in the next month's broadsheets that the king's missing servant girl had died in a cooking fire in a town no one had ever heard of, and the boy with her, and the matter would have been closed. Why tonight then? Because I sent Othin. The salt trader's son. The salt trader's son. Yes. I sent Othin 4 months ago, the day the moon priestesses brought me the first rumor of you, and I told him to ride every fishing town on the western coast, and to send me a hawk only when he found you. He found you tonight. He sent the hawk. I rode. Then House Drenner? House Drenner has had a man inside my hawk tower for 2 years. The cottage went very still. They read the hawk before I did, Severin said. They had men in this town already, waiting. They were going to take the cottage tonight regardless. Othin finding you is what told them which cottage. Rin felt cold creep up the back of her neck. Then by writing to me I led them to your door. Yes. I knew that when I left. I rode anyway, because I have a sister of the Grey Cliff Order 1 day ahead of me on every road in this country, and because I have a tracker who is worth 10 of any man Drenner has ever bought, and because I judged, possibly wrongly, that if it was a question of whether House Drenner reached you first or I did, I had to be the one who arrived. I will not apologize for that judgment. I will apologize for everything else. She looked at the bodies on her floor. You knew this would happen in my kitchen. I knew there was a chance of it. I sent Helvena ahead so that the chance would not become the certainty. I am sorry, Maven, that you had to be in a cellar under your own hearth tonight. I would have taken every one of those men in the road outside if I had been an hour faster. I was not an hour faster. The horse could not be. She looked at the gray in his hair at the temples. How many hours have you been in the saddle? In total, since the hawk. Yes. 21. She closed her eyes. Severin. Yes. There are more of them. The ones who came tonight were not the whole hand. House Drenner would not send 6 men for a queen killing. 6 men was the burning party. The killing party is somewhere else. Yes. Where? He looked then at Helvena. Helvena, who had stopped crying and was wiping her face on the corner of her gray cloak, lifted her chin and gave him the small, precise nod of a moon priestess, giving a king permission to say a thing in front of a third party. They are at Ironreach, Severin said. They moved on the city this morning. The cadet branches of House Drenner, and 3 of the beta houses they bought during the trial last spring, and a number of mercenaries they have been quietly putting on retainers for 9 months. They took the lower gates at dawn. They took the Cantor's Quarter by midday. By the time I left the saddle for the third horse, the message rider behind me was telling me they had reached the inner court. The throne. The throne is held. My first beta has the throne room and the upper towers. The queen's apartments are held. The treasury is held. The cathedral is held by the High Cantor, who I have never trusted in my life and who has, today, surprised me. The lower city is not held. The lower city is on fire. She felt the floor tilt. How many people? In the lower city. How many people live in the lower city, Severin? How many? 11,000. She stood up off the stool. Then why are you sitting on my hearthstone? He looked up at her. Because the lower city was always going to burn the moment they understood I was riding for you, and the only thing in the world that buys those 11,000 people their lives back is the boy in my arms and the woman in front of me, walking back into Ironreach beside me before the next sunrise. They will not stop the burning to bargain with my first beta. They will not stop it for the throne. They will stop it for the boy and for you, because the boy and you are the only thing that breaks the legitimacy they are about to claim, and they know it. They are burning the city to draw us in. I rode to you because there was no other version of tonight that did not end with you dead in this cottage and the city dead in its streets. I am sitting on your hearthstone because you have not yet told me whether you will come. The cottage was so quiet she could hear the salt wind under the door. You are asking me, Rin said slowly, to walk into a city that is burning, with our son. To put my face in front of the people who have spent 9 months trying to kill us, on the gamble that they value the symbol of us more than they want us dead. Yes. And you are asking me knowing that the last time you asked me to walk into a building full of people who wanted me dead, you did not warn me first. He set his jaw. He nodded once, very small. Yes. This time, Severin, you tell me. Everything. Before the door of that city. Before any aisle. Before any altar. You tell me what the play is, and you tell me what my part is, and you tell me what can go wrong, and you tell me what you will do if it does. And you do not. You do not. Hide one piece of it from me because you are afraid I will refuse. Do you understand me? Yes. Say it back. I will tell you everything. Before the door of the city. I will not hide any piece of it. If you refuse any part of the play, we will find another play. Or we will turn around, and the city will fall. And I will live with the city falling rather than lie to you again. Good. She took a long breath. She looked at her son in his father's arms. Then Helvena will hold the boy on the road. You and I will ride ahead. We will reach Ironreach by dawn. And before the gate, Severin, before any gate, you will tell me the whole shape of what is waiting on the other side of it. Yes. Stand up. He stood up. He stood up very carefully because the child was still in his arms, and because the child had begun, finally, to wake fully, and to study his father's face with the long, unblinking gravity of a 6-month-old who had a great deal of opinion and no language for any of it yet. Calden reached one small fist up toward Severin's chin. The Alpha King of Ironreach bent his head and let the small fist close on his lower lip and stood like that for a heartbeat with his eyes shut. Then he gave the child to Helvena, and he went out the door to ready the horses, and Rin went to her chest under the bed and lifted out, from beneath the blankets and the small wooden carving of a horse, the scrap of black ceremonial cloak she had carried for 9 months and had never been able to burn. She did not put it back in the chest. She put it in the inner pocket of her cloak, against her ribs, on the same side as her heart. Then she walked out into the salt wind to ride to a city that was burning. They rode the rest of the night without speaking. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 people who had said the thing that needed saying and were now using the road to carry it. The horses ran easy under them, the second pair Severin had brought, fresh from a post house he had passed 2 hours before the Hawk. Helvena rode behind, with Calden bundled inside her gray cloak against the warmth of her chest, and Joran rode behind her, sword across his thighs, eyes on every tree line they passed. The first signs of Ironreach came an hour before dawn. It was not the towers Rin saw first. It was the smoke. A long, low stain across the sky to the east, the color of bruised iron. Even at this distance she could smell it on the wind. Burning thatch, burning oil, something else underneath the burning that she did not name to herself, because she had once been a servant in the lower city, and she knew the people who lived in the houses that were now sending up that smoke. Severin reined in on the crest of the last hill. He raised one hand. Helvena stopped behind them. Joran stopped behind her. He turned his horse so he was facing Rin directly. He did not dismount. There was no time to dismount. "The shape of it," he said, "as I promised." "Tell me." "The lower gate is held by the cadet houses, 3 of them, the Valanges, the Merowins, and what is left of the Drenner cousins. They have perhaps 400 wolves between them, half mercenary, half house sworn, and they have the lower city, which means they have the people in it. They have built a barricade across the Merchant's Bridge. They have moved the women and children from the eastern quarter into the Cooper's yards behind the barricade, and they are using them as the wall. They will not move that wall for any reason except the one we are bringing them." She nodded once. "Inside the inner walls, my first beta, Reskar, holds the upper city. He has perhaps 200 wolves, all house-sworn, all mine. He holds the throne room, the towers, the treasury, the queen's apartments, and the cathedral. He has been told by Hawk that I am riding in from the west with the heir and the heir's mother, and that he is to open the postern gate at the 7th bell and not the main gate, because the main gate is being watched by Drenner archers from 3 rooftops. The 7th bell. Dawn. Less than an hour. Go on. When we come through the postern, we will be in the kitchen yard of the old palace, the one behind the cathedral. Helvena will take the child up the back stair into the queen's apartments, where Reskar's wife will be waiting, and the boy will not be on the field again until the field is over. That is not negotiable. Maven. The boy does not go in front of the barricade. I will not permit it, and I will not pretend I am uncertain about permitting it." Agreed. His shoulders eased a fraction. "You and I will go up to the cathedral. Not into it. Onto the bell tower roof. The High Cantor is holding the cathedral. He will let us up. From the bell tower roof, the entire lower city can see us, and we can see the entire lower city, and there is one bell on that tower that has not been rung in 200 years. The bell of recognition." He looked at her. The first surprise she had seen on his face since the cottage doorway. "You know it. It rang the morning I ran. I heard it from outside the city walls. I did not know until tonight that I had heard it. Helvena told me on the road." "Yes." He took a long breath. "The bell is rung when an Alpha and a Luna present themselves to the people for the first time, and the people are required by law older than any king to look up and decide whether they recognize the pairing. If they do, they kneel. If they do not, they do not. It is not enforceable. There is no penalty for refusing. It is the one ceremony in our history that the crown cannot make happen by command. Either the people kneel of their own will, or they do not. And if they do not, then House Drenner wins. Their argument, the one they have been preparing for 9 months, is that I am a king broken by grief, that you are a servant girl who bewitched me, and that the boy is the bastard child of a deranged season. They are betting that the lower city, with its houses on fire and its children behind a barricade, will not look up at the bell tower at dawn and kneel to a runaway servant. They are betting that the lower city is too tired and too frightened and too angry. Are they right? He did not answer at once. "They might be," he said. "I do not know. I have not seen the lower city in 9 months. I do not know what the lower city thinks of me anymore. I have not been a good king to them since you ran. I have been a king who slept 4 hours a night and signed the documents Reskar put in front of him and did not look up. They have a right to be tired of me. I am asking the people of my city to do a thing tonight, Maven, that they have every reason to refuse. What is the part of this you are afraid to tell me? He met her eyes. If the city does not kneel, he said, there is a third option, and the third option is mine alone. It is not yours, and it is not the boys. If the bell rings and the lower city does not kneel, I will go down off the tower, and I will go to the merchant's bridge, and I will offer myself for the wall. Severin. Hear me. Severin. No. Hear me. House Drenner has been trying for 9 months to put a knife in my back and call it justice. If I go to the bridge and offer them the front of my chest instead, in front of the people they are using as a wall, they cannot take the offer without revealing what they are. Either they refuse, in which case the city sees what they are, or they accept, in which case the wall becomes meaningless because the trade has already been made, and Reskar comes down out of the upper city with 200 wolves and ends them in the open street. Either way, the wall comes down. Either way, the city lives. Either way you die. Yes. She stared at him. She stared at him for so long that the eastern sky began to lighten, very faintly, behind the smoke. That is your plan. That is what you were going to keep from me. I was not going to keep it from you. I was going to tell you on this hill, and I am telling you on this hill. I told you I would not hide it. I am not hiding it. You are telling me on the hill 1 hour before dawn. I am telling you when there is still time to refuse it. That is what I promised. I promised you would know the whole shape before the gate. The gate is 40 minutes away. You have 40 minutes to refuse the plan, and if you refuse it, I will make a different one, and the city will probably fall, and I will live with the city falling. Those are the terms I gave you in your cottage. I am keeping them. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to hit him with both fists, in the chest, on a horse, at dawn, on a hill above a burning city, and she also understood with the clear, cold understanding of a woman who had grown up in the kitchens of a palace and had learned what kings sounded like when they were lying, that he was not lying. He had told her. He had told her when there was still time. He was, in his own broken, stubborn way, doing the thing she had asked him to do in the cottage, and he was doing it correctly, and she hated him for it almost as much as she loved him for it. There is a fourth option, she said. He went still. Tell me. You do not go down to the bridge alone. We go up to the bell tower together, and we ring the bell together. And when the city looks up, I speak. Not you. Me. The bell rings for a pairing, Severin. The pairing is 2 voices. Half of that bell has been silent for 9 months, because half of that pairing has been in a fishing town. The lower city is not tired of us. The lower city has never heard us. They have heard one ceremony in a cathedral that was over before any of them got close enough to see, and they have heard 9 months of broadsheets paid for by House Drenner. They have not heard me. I am going to give them me. Maven, I am not finished. If, after I speak, the city does not kneel, then you may go down to the bridge. Not before. You will not throw yourself under a wall on a gamble that the city is too tired to look up, when you have not first given the city the thing it has not been given. You owe them my voice before you owe them your throat. Do you understand me? He looked at her for a very long time. Then he nodded. Once, slowly. Yes. Say it back. You speak first. The city decides. Only after, if the city refuses, do I go to the bridge. I will not preempt you. I will not throw myself under any wall before you have spoken. Good. She gathered her reins. Then ride. The 7th bell will not wait for us. They came down off the hill and into the smoke. Reskar opened the postern gate at the 7th bell, exactly as the sky behind the cathedral was beginning to bleed pink at the lowest edge of the smoke. He was a wolf of 50 years, shaven-headed, scarred at the throat from a fight that had nearly taken his head off when Severin was 12, and Rin had served him bread in the king's small dining hall 100 times, and he had never once looked at her face. He looked at her face now. He looked at her face for the count of a slow breath, and what he saw there made him bow, in a way she had never seen him bow to anyone living, and step aside, without a word. Helvanna took Calden up the back stair. Rin watched her son disappear around the curve of the wall, and she did not let herself watch any further than that, because watching further would have unmade her. She and Severin climbed the bell tower. 240 steps. She counted them. Her legs were shaking by the 100th. She did not let herself stop. Severin climbed beside her, not in front, not behind, and at the 180th step, he reached out and took her hand, and she let him. And they climbed the last 60 steps together with their fingers braided as if their fingers had not been parted for 9 months. The High Cantor was waiting at the top. He was a man Rin had never trusted, because she had once heard him speak of servants in a way that made her never wish to bring him a cup of anything again, and he was on his knees on the lead roof of the bell tower, with his ceremonial robes pulled up over his old knees and tears on his face. She did not understand. "My king," he said, "my queen. The bell is ready." Rin had never been called my queen before in her life. She did not have time to feel it. "Ring it," Severin said. The High Cantor pulled the rope. The bell of recognition rang out across the lower city of Ironreach for the second time in 9 months, and this time the city was awake to hear it. Rin walked to the parapet. The lower city lay below her in the gray light, half on fire, half not. The Merchant's Bridge, a thick black knot at its center where 400 wolves and a wall of frightened women and children stood in the open street. Faces turned up toward the bell. Thousands of faces. The faces of bakers and dock women and the fishmonger's children and the old gatekeeper who had let her out of the kitchen yard 9 months ago without asking her name. Faces she had served bread to. Faces she had brought linens past. Faces that 9 months ago in a cathedral had not been allowed to see her. She put both hands on the cold stone of the parapet. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The bell tower was built so that a single voice from its parapet carried down into every street of the lower city. It was the oldest piece of crowncraft in Ironreach. It was older than the crown. "I am Maven," she said. The lower city went still. Even the fire seemed to pause. "I scrubbed the hearths of the eastern wing for 3 years. The old gatekeeper at the kitchen yard knows me. The baker on Cooper's Lane knows me. The fishmonger's wife on the 3rd quay knows me, because I helped her birth her second son in the spring 4 years ago. I am not a stranger to you. You have walked past me in the street 1,000 times. You have not been allowed to see me. I am letting you see me now." She let that settle. 9 months ago, in the cathedral, I was made to kneel before a Luna I did not believe in, by a king who did not warn me what he was about to do. I was not asked. I was used. I ran. I had a son. I have come back. I have come back not because the king sent for me, but because the people who ordered the cathedral that day and ordered the burning of your streets this morning are the same people, and I am tired of being the reason your children are behind a wall. The wall on the Merchant's Bridge is not for me. The wall on the Merchant's Bridge is for the houses that built it. They are using your daughters to hide behind. They will tell you it is for the kingdom. It is for them. I am asking you to stop letting them stand behind your daughters. I am asking you to come out from behind the wall they built around you. I am asking you to take your city back." She paused. Her hands on the stone were not shaking anymore. "I am not asking you to kneel to me," she said. "I do not need you to kneel. I have knelt enough for both of us. I am asking you to stand." The lower city made a sound. It was not a cheer. It was not a roar. It was the long, low collective breath of 11,000 people exhaling at once, and underneath the breath was a second sound, a small dry sound, like 1,000 small dry sounds at once, and Rin understood after a moment what the second sound was. It was the sound of people who had been on their knees for 9 months of broadsheets and barricades, and dawn fires getting up off their knees. In the Merchant's Bridge, The wall began to come apart. Not from the front, from the inside. The women and children the cadet houses had pressed into service as a living wall began, very simply, to walk off the bridge. They walked off it the way people walk out of a building that is no longer on fire. The wolves of the cadet houses tried to stop them, and could not stop them, because the women and children were not running, they were walking. And there is no easy way for a wolf in a cordon to stop a quiet woman who has decided to walk past him with her child on her hip. Behind the wall, the cadet houses understood, all at once, what was happening. Their archers on the rooftops turned toward the bell tower. Severin stepped in front of Rin. 3 arrows took him in the chest before she could speak. She did not scream. That was the strange thing she remembered afterward. She did not scream. She had thought, all her life, that she was the kind of woman who would scream. She did not. She caught him under both arms as he went down to the lead roof, exactly as he had once caught her under both arms in a cathedral, and she lowered him to the stone, and she said his name once in a voice that did not entirely belong to her, and then she did the thing she had not known she could do. She answered the mark on her shoulder. For 9 months she had been pushing the mark down a corridor and saying no to it. For 9 months she had been good at saying no to her own body. She stopped saying no. She let it open. She let the bond between them flood up through her shoulder and down through her hands and into the man on the roof, and she understood in the same instant what an unfinished bond between true mates actually was. It was a vein. It was a vein between 2 hearts. If one heart stopped, the other could pour through it. Not forever. Not even for very long. But long enough. The arrowheads in his chest were Drenner steel, which was a soft poisoned metal made for exactly this purpose, and her hands on his chest knew it before her mind did. She felt the poison in her own palms. She felt it leave him, drawn up into her along the vein of the bond, and she felt her own breath go shallow and her own vision narrow, and somewhere very far away she heard the High Cantor saying, my queen, you cannot," and she ignored him, because she was busy, and because there was, in fact, a thing she could do, and the thing she could do was not free, and she had decided. Severin's eyes opened. "Maven," he said, "stop. No. Stop. You are dying. I am deciding." His hand came up, weak, slow, and closed around her wrist. He did not pull her hand off his chest. He pulled her hand to his mouth instead, and he pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, exactly where he had once pressed it in the Eastern Garden a year ago, and he bit. Not hard, just enough. The bond sealed. It sealed both ways. She had been pouring herself into him along an open vein, and he closed the vein, and what had been a one-way flow became a circle, and the poison that had been sitting in her palms went somewhere they could share it, because 2 wolves can carry what one cannot. And her vision came back in a slow gray rush, and his color came back in a slower one. And when she lifted her head from his chest, the 3 Drenner arrows had pushed themselves out of his ribs, the way splinters push themselves out of a hand that has decided to heal. The High Cantor was on his knees again, but not in any ceremony she recognized. Behind her, in the lower city, the cadet houses were running. The people of Ironreach were not chasing them. The people of Ironreach were doing something quieter and worse. They were walking. They were walking up Cooper's Lane and the 3rd Quay and the road behind the cathedral, in their thousands, toward the inner wall, and they were walking with the slow, purposeful step of a city that had decided, in the space of 1 speech and 1 bell and 1 bond sealed on a tower roof, that it was taking itself back. Reskar's 200 wolves came down out of the upper city to meet them. They met as one army. The cadet houses did not surrender. They were not given the chance. Lord Valange of the Valange branch was found in the Cooper's yard behind the broken barricade, attempting to put on the apron of a journeyman to hide among the workers, and the journeymen of the Cooper's yard handled him themselves, and Reskar arrived too late to intervene, and was, Rin was told later, not visibly disappointed. Lysith of House Drenner, who had been sitting in a cell beneath the cathedral for 9 months, was found dead in her cell by morning. The investigation was not pursued. Lord Caelric, who had been silenced on the cathedral altar 9 months earlier, and had since lived in a small house on the cliff above the harbor, under the watch of 2 of Rescar's wolves, was found dead in the cliff house that morning. The investigation was likewise not pursued. By midday, the lower city was no longer on fire. By the second bell of the afternoon, Severin and Maven came down out of the bell tower together, on their feet, slowly, holding hands the way they had climbed up, and the people of Ironreach who lined the road from the cathedral to the palace did not kneel. They stood. They stood the entire length of the road, in their thousands, in exactly the way they had been asked to stand. Helvenna was waiting on the steps of the palace with Calden in her arms. The boy reached for both of them at once, with both small fists, the way a child reaches who has decided that he has 2 parents and intends to be carried by both of them at the same time. And Severin and Maven each took one of his small fists in one of their hands, and they walked up the steps of the palace together, and the doors closed behind them. Outside, in the streets, the city did not cheer. The city went home. It went home, and it began, very quietly, to put itself back together. And it carried with it, into the small kitchens and the small bedrooms and the small workshops of 11,000 small lives, the memory of a woman on a bell tower who had not asked them to kneel. 3 years passed. The cadet branches of House Drenner were dissolved by edict, their lands returned to the lower city as common holdings, and the merchant's bridge was rebuilt in stone. A small bronze plaque was set into the parapet of the bridge at the place where the wall had been. The plaque said only, "Here a city stood up." It did not say who had asked it to. The bell tower of the cathedral was given a new bell ringer, a young woman from the 3rd key who had been one of the journeymen in the cooper's yard the morning of the rising, and she rang the 7th bell every dawn. Not the bell of recognition, just the ordinary morning bell, but she rang it with a particular care that older bell ringers commented on without quite being able to name. Sister Helvenna of the Greycliff Order returned to her cliff and to her small leather book, and she lived 4 more years and then died one spring in her sleep, and was buried, at her own request, on a hill above a fishing town called Hollowmere, where the salt wind came up the road in the evenings and smelled of lavender and tallow and cedar shavings. Othin the salt trader's son was given a small estate near the western coast, and a wife of his own choosing, and he lived an ordinary life and was buried at 80 under a stone that did not mention any king. Rescar continued to be First Beta, and continued not to sleep enough, and continued to terrify junior couriers. And in the 4th year of the new reign, on a winter evening, he asked the queen, in private, in the small dining hall, where she had once served him bread, whether she remembered him not looking at her face. She said yes. He said he was sorry. She said it was a long time ago. He said the apology was not for her. The apology was for every servant in every kitchen in the kingdom, whose face he had not looked at because he had been told all his life that there was nothing in their faces worth seeing. She poured him a 2nd cup of wine and let him sit with that for a while, and after a while he stood up and bowed to her, properly this time, the way he had bowed to her on the morning of the postern gate, and he went back to his work. Calden grew. He was a quiet boy, who carried his great-grandfather's eyes and his mother's hands and a small habit, when thinking, of pressing his palm flat against the hollow of his own shoulder, in the place where his father carried a sealed claiming bite and his mother carried its mate. No one had taught him to do it. He did it anyway. His parents watched him do it and said nothing. He had 2 younger sisters, by the 5th year of the reign, twin girls. The midwife of the lower city, who had been one of the women on the merchant's bridge that morning, came up the back stair of the palace to deliver them, and refused, afterward, any payment but a single loaf of bread, which she said was the only currency that mattered between her house and the queen's. She took the loaf. She ate half of it on the way home. She gave the other half to the old gatekeeper of the kitchen yard, who had been the first man in Ironreach to know the queen's name. The queen's name, in the lower city, was always Maven. In the upper city, in the formal documents of the realm, in the seals and the writs and the histories, she was Queen Maven of Ironreach, of No House, of the Bell Tower, the title given to her by the old wolves who had drawn up her formal name and could not agree on which other thing to put after it. She kept the scrap of black ceremonial cloak in a wooden box on the windowsill of the small private sitting room she shared with Severin. She did not look at it often. She did not need to. It was enough that it was there, on the windowsill, in the light, instead of in a chest under a bed in a cottage 300 leagues away. On the last night of the third year, she stood at that window and watched the snow come down over Ironreach, and Severin came up behind her and put his arms around her, around the small new curve of a fourth child she had told him about that morning, and he laid his chin on the top of her head. And he said, very quietly, into her hair, "Forgive me." She did not ask for what. She did not need to ask. He had said it every winter on the last night of the year, since the night they had come down off the bell tower. And he would say it, she suspected, every winter for the rest of their lives, and she had decided, somewhere in the second year, that she was going to let him. "I forgave you on the hill," she said. "I will forgive you again tomorrow. I will forgive you every year you ask." That is the answer, Severin. The answer does not change. I know. Good. They stood at the window for a long time while the snow came down over the lower city, and the old gatekeeper of the kitchen yard, in his small house on Cooper's Lane, banked his fire and went to bed. And the bell ringer of the third key set her small alarm for the seventh bell, and 11,000 small lives in the lower city of Ironreach did not, that night, have to stand for anyone, because they had stood for themselves once, 3 years ago, in the gray dawn, and once was enough. In the cathedral, the high cantor, who had survived all of it and had grown, in his old age, into a man who finally looked at the faces of the servants who brought him bread, lit the last candle of the year before the altar. He did not pray. He had decided, some years back, that he was not the praying sort. He stood in front of the small bright candle in the great dark cathedral, and he thought about a girl in a gray gown who had once climbed 3 steps of a dais carrying a silver cup. And he thought about a king who had stepped past a noble lady to lift the girl to her feet. And he thought, not for the first time, that there were ceremonies older than the ones he had learned from books, and that he had been, perhaps, very fortunate to be permitted to witness one. He blew out the candle. He went home. Outside, over the lower city of Ironreach, the snow kept coming down. And somewhere in the small private sitting room of the palace, a woman who had once been told to kneel stood at a window with a king's arms around her, and they did not speak, because they did not need to. And the bond between them, long ago sealed on the lead roof of a bell tower at dawn, hummed warm and quiet beneath their skin like a fire that had been told, very firmly, that it was never going out. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.